They thought I'd taken a sleeping pill. That's the only reason they didn't lower their voices. I was in the guest room at the end of the hall, my daughter's guest room, which I had been careful never to call my room, even after 3 months of sleeping in it, when I heard my son-in-law's voice drift through the heating vent in the floor. He was in the kitchen, directly below me. The house was that kind of new construction, the kind that looks solid but carries sound like a whisper through a tin can. "She won't even know what she signed," he said. "You've seen how she is. Tired all the time. Just put it in front of her in the morning before coffee. She'll sign." A pause. My daughter's voice, lower, harder to catch. Then Greg again. "The policy is worth more than the house ever was. We just need her signature one more time." I sat up slowly in the dark. My knee, the one I'd had replaced 6 weeks ago, ached the way it always did at night. I pressed my foot flat to the floor. I did not move. I barely breathed. I listened until their voices drifted away from the vent, until I heard the television click on in the living room and the soft sounds of a normal evening resume below me. Then I reached for my phone on the nightstand. It was 11:42. I opened the Notes app and began typing everything I had just heard, word for word, while it was still sharp in my mind. My hands were steady. 31 years as a registered nurse will do that for you. You learn early that panic is a luxury. You don't have time for it when someone's life is in your hands. I set the phone face down on the mattress and sat in the dark for a long time. The policy he mentioned was my late husband's life insurance. Richard had taken it out in 1987, the year our daughter Janet was born. He paid into it for 32 years. When he died of a stroke 4 years ago, I became the sole beneficiary. $240,000. I hadn't touched it. I'd left it in a separate account, the kind that earns almost nothing but sits there like a wall between you and desperation. I had no plans to spend it. I thought of it as an emergency I hoped never to have. I moved into Janet and Greg's house in February, after my knee surgery. My apartment had 3 steps up from the parking lot and a bathroom with a tub I could no longer safely use on my own. Janet called the week after my operation and said, "Mom, just come stay with us until you're back on your feet. We have the space." She sounded so certain, so warm, that I didn't let myself question it. I gave up the apartment. I had Greg help me move what little I kept into their spare room. I put the rest in storage. The first few weeks were fine, or fine enough. Janet made dinner most nights. The grandchildren, my son-in-law's kids from his first marriage, 13 and 15, were polite in the distant way teenagers manage when a grandparent materializes in their space. Greg was cordial. He asked about my recovery. He refilled my water glass at dinner. Then small things started shifting. The storage unit bill began going to Greg's email instead of mine, because I'd mentioned struggling with the login, and he'd offered to set it up. My mail started being sorted on the kitchen counter, already opened, because Greg said the postal carrier sometimes bent envelopes and he liked to check for damage. My doctor's appointments were rescheduled twice without my being asked, because Janet said she'd spoken to the office and found better times that worked with her schedule. None of it felt alarming alone. Each thing had a reasonable explanation attached to it, offered before I could ask. That was what I should have noticed. Reasonable people don't preempt questions that haven't been raised. 3 weeks ago, I asked Greg to show me the online account for my savings. I hadn't checked it myself in 2 months because my laptop had a cracked screen and he'd taken it to be repaired. The repair had taken longer than expected. He pulled it up on his tablet, handed it to me, and stood beside me while I looked. The balance was $12,000 less than I remembered. "Those are the insurance premiums," he said, before I could ask. "Your supplemental policy. It went up. You approved the autopay last fall." I hadn't approved any autopay last fall. I had no memory of it, but he said it so matter-of-factly, with his arms crossed and his head slightly tilted as if waiting for me to catch up, that I said nothing. I told myself I must be misremembering. I had been tired since the surgery. I was on pain medication for the first several weeks. Maybe I had signed something I'd forgotten. I should have pressed him. I didn't. That night, lying in the dark, was the first time I let myself form the thought clearly. Something is wrong. Not just off, not just uncomfortable, wrong. Now it was almost midnight, and I had just heard my son-in-law tell someone on the phone that I would sign a document in the morning if he put it in front of me before I had my coffee. I got up quietly. I had been sleeping in my clothes more often lately. Not from depression. From some instinct I hadn't named yet. I went to the closet and pulled out the canvas tote bag I used for physical therapy. I packed methodically and without sound. My important documents were already in an envelope in the inside pocket of my winter coat. I had moved them there 2 weeks ago when I noticed the drawer in the guest room didn't lock. My passport, my Medicare card, the account information for Richard's insurance policy, copies of my nursing license, and a handwritten list of phone numbers I had memorized in the years before everything lived in a phone. I put on my coat. I slipped my shoes on in the hallway. I did not look back at the guest room. It had never been mine. The front door opened without a sound. The night was cold, mid-March, and the street was empty except for a dog barking somewhere a few blocks over. I walked to the end of their cul-de-sac and then kept walking. I didn't go far that first night. There was a 24-hour diner 4 blocks away, the kind with red vinyl booths and a coffee maker that never stops. I sat in the booth farthest from the door, ordered decaf, and thought about what came next. My phone showed 7 contacts I trusted. I went through them one by one in my mind. 2 were out of state. 1 had passed away in November. That left 4. Of those 4, 1 was my friend Beverly, who I had worked with for 11 years in the ICU at Mercy General. Beverly had retired to a house 40 minutes north of the city, and she had a second bedroom she called her guest room for people who need to disappear for a while. She'd said that once as a joke at my retirement party. I had laughed. I thought about it now. I texted her at 12:18 in the morning. I know it's late. I need a place to stay. Not forever, just for now. Something's happened. She replied in 4 minutes. Come tonight. Doors unlocked. Coffee's ready by 7. That was Beverly. 30 years of night shifts had cured her of needing sleep. I called a car from the app on my phone. The driver was a young man who played quiet music and didn't ask questions. I watched the city give way to residential streets and then to the long, flat stretches of road that led north, and I thought about Richard, about the policy he had paid into for 32 years, about the way he used to say that insurance was just love written in the language of money. He had wanted me protected. He had planned ahead. He had written those 32 years of premiums so that when he was gone, I would not have to depend on anyone. I was going to make sure it stayed that way. Beverly's porch light was on. She opened the door before I knocked. She looked at my face and my tote bag and my coat and said nothing, just stepped aside to let me in. She made tea. We sat at her kitchen table until 2 in the morning while I told her everything. When I finished, she wrapped both her hands around her mug and was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "The signature. That's what tonight was about." Yes, then, you leaving tonight is the only thing that stopped it. I know. She leaned back. First thing tomorrow, you call the bank. I slept in her guest room, which smelled like lavender and old books. I slept without hearing footsteps in the hallway. I woke up before 6 and lay there watching the light change through the curtain until Beverly knocked and said coffee was ready. By 8:30, I was sitting across from a branch manager at First Federal, a woman in her 40s named Diana with reading glasses pushed up into her hair and a direct way of speaking that I liked immediately. I laid the account information on her desk and told her what I had overheard and what I suspected about the $12,000. She pulled up the accounts. She went quiet in the way that people go quiet when what they're seeing is worse than what they expected. There are 6 transactions here, she said finally, over the past 11 weeks. Each one is under $3,000. I looked at the screen she turned toward me. 6 withdrawals, each labeled with a different vendor name I didn't recognize, totaling just over $14,000. Kept under $3,000 to avoid automatic flags, Diana said. She wasn't asking. Mrs. Simmons, do you recognize any of these payees? No. Did you authorize anyone to access this account on your behalf? I did not. She pressed her lips together. Is there a power of attorney on file anywhere that we should know about? That question landed differently than the others. I thought about it before I answered. Not that I signed, but I'd like you to check. She typed for a moment. Then she looked up. There's a document on file here. Added to your account 8 weeks ago. It grants your son-in-law, Gregory Allen Holt, limited power of attorney for financial matters. I kept my face still. I did not sign that document. Diana set her pen down on the desk. I want you to hear me say something clearly. If a document was filed in your name without your authorization, that is fraud. Financial exploitation of an elder is a criminal matter in this state. I am going to ask you to give a formal statement today, and I am going to ask our fraud team to pull the original paperwork. I'd like to do all of that, I said. And I'd like every account access for Gregory Holt frozen as of right now. She nodded once. Consider it done. We spent 2 hours at the bank. By the time I walked out, every account linked to my name had been secured, all shared access removed, and a fraud investigation had been opened. Diana had also referred me to an attorney, a woman named Ruth Callahan, whose card she kept in her desk for exactly these situations. She told me Ruth worked primarily with older adults on financial exploitation cases, and that her first consultation was always free. I called Ruth from the sidewalk outside the bank. She answered herself. Not a receptionist. Her voice was brisk and businesslike, and she did not waste time expressing surprise or sympathy before she got to questions. That was exactly what I needed. I was in her office by 1 p.m. She had a calm, uncluttered space, the kind that suggested she preferred facts to furniture. I gave her the account statements Diana had printed for me, the notes I had typed on my phone the night before, and the insurance policy documents I had carried in my coat for 2 weeks. She read everything slowly. She asked several questions. She wrote on a legal pad in precise, small handwriting. When she finished, she put her pen down and folded her hands on the desk. The insurance policy, she said. Has anyone asked you to sign a change of beneficiary recently? Not yet. I overheard my son-in-law say they planned to put something in front of me this morning. So you left before they had the chance. Yes. She was quiet for a moment. That was the right call. A change of beneficiary on a life insurance policy, if signed, even if signed under duress or with diminished clarity, can be extremely difficult to challenge after the fact. You got out before they could make it irreversible. I'm a retired nurse, I said. I know what an irreversible decision looks like. Ruth allowed herself a small, genuine smile. Then let me tell you what we can do. We can file a formal revocation of that power of attorney today. We can submit a fraud report to the State Attorney General's office. We can document everything through your bank's investigation. And we can write a new directive, a proper one you choose and sign voluntarily, naming someone you trust. I have a brother, I said. My younger brother, Thomas. He's an accountant. He's been asking me for 2 years if everything was okay. He sounds like the right choice. He is. We spent the rest of the afternoon in her office. She drafted the revocation documents. She explained what the investigation process would look like. She walked me through the difference between what they had done. She used the phrase financial exploitation, clearly and without softening it, and what would have happened if they had succeeded with the insurance policy. When I left, the sun was already low. I stood on the sidewalk for a long moment. My knee ached. My back ached. I was 68 years old, and I had just undone 8 weeks of quiet, careful theft in the space of one very long day. I did not feel triumphant. I felt like a woman who had narrowly avoided something that should never have been attempted in the first place. I called Thomas from the car Beverly sent for me. He answered on the first ring. Carol. His voice had that edge it got when he already knew something was wrong. I need to tell you what's been happening, I said. He listened for the full 15 minutes of the drive back to Beverly's house without interrupting. When I finished, there was a short silence. I'm driving up Saturday, he said. You don't have to. Carol. He said my name the way he did when we were children, and he thought I was being foolish. I'm driving up Saturday. Do you need anything before then? No, I said. I think I have what I need. Janet called that evening at 6:47. I watched the name light up the screen and let it go to voicemail. Then Greg called. Then Janet. Again. I turned the phone to silent and left it on Beverly's kitchen counter while we ate soup and talked about other things. The voicemail from Janet was 20 seconds long. Mom. We woke up this morning and you were gone. Please call me. We're worried. The kids are worried. Call me back. The kids, the teenagers who went to their rooms after dinner and texted their friends and looked past me in the hallway. I did not think they were worried. I thought Janet needed a reason that sounded like love. I deleted the voicemail. 2 days later, a letter arrived at Beverly's house. This required some explanation. I had not given Janet or Greg Beverly's address, but I had left my address book in the guest room, an old paper one, the spiral-bound kind that I had kept for 30 years out of habit. Beverly's name and address were in it. They had gone through my things. Of course they had. The address book was just the first thing they found useful. Beverly handed me the envelope across the breakfast table, with her eyebrows slightly raised. I opened it with the butter knife. The letter was 2 pages, handwritten by Janet, in the careful script she used when she wanted to seem sincere. She wrote that she was heartbroken by my departure, that she and Greg had only ever tried to help, that the financial matters were complicated and there were things she needed to explain in person. She wrote that Greg was devastated that I seemed to distrust him. She wrote that I was putting the whole family through unnecessary pain. She wrote, near the end, that she was concerned about my mental clarity, that the doctor she had spoken to suggested this kind of impulsive behavior could sometimes indicate cognitive changes in women my age. I folded the letter on the second page and set it on the table. Well, Beverly asked. She's trying to plant a seed, I said. Get it on record that I've been confused. In case this ends up in front of anyone official. Beverly picked up her mug. What are you going to do? Nothing, I said. For now, let her wonder. I gave the letter to Ruth the following morning. Ruth read it once, made a copy, and placed it in my folder without comment. Then she said, "This is actually helpful to us. It establishes that they knew where you were, that they were in contact with a physician about you without your consent, and that they are attempting to preemptively characterize your mental state." She paused. Do you have a primary care physician of your own, outside of any appointments your daughter may have arranged? Yes, Dr. Martinson. I've been his patient for 12 years. Call and make an appointment this week. Get your own cognitive assessment on record. Not because there's anything to find, but because it protects you. I made the appointment that afternoon. Thomas arrived on Saturday as promised, driving up from the city with a folder of his own and the quiet, steady manner he'd had since childhood. He sat at Beverly's kitchen table with Ruth's documents and the bank statements and the insurance policy and spent an hour going through everything without speaking. Then he looked up and said, "This is worse than I thought." I know. The autopay wasn't insurance, Carol. I traced the payee. He pushed a printed page across the table. It's a holding company, registered 3 months ago. Greg is listed as the sole director. I looked at the page. The company name was something generic, 2 words that meant nothing. A shell. He had built a funnel and routed my money into it one small withdrawal at a time, just below the threshold that would have triggered an alert. How much in total? I asked. $14,260 from your savings. Whatever he was planning to get from the insurance policy that would have been the main event. $240,000. Richard's 32 years. I sat with that for a moment. Not with anger. Not yet. Just with the full weight of it. A man I had welcomed to holiday dinners, whose children I had bought birthday gifts for, who had refilled my water glass at dinner and called it kindness. What do I do? I asked. Thomas was already reaching for his phone. You let me start making calls. He stayed 4 days. He coordinated with Ruth, with Diana at the bank, with the fraud investigator, the state attorney general's office assigned to the case. He drove me to my appointment with Dr. Martinson, sat in the waiting room while I had a full cognitive evaluation, and waited while the office printed the clean summary he could file. On his last evening, we sat on Beverly's back porch in the cold, and he handed me a cup of tea and said, "You should have called me 2 months ago." I thought I was misremembering things, I said. They were very careful to make it seem that way. I know. He was quiet for a moment. I've been watching Greg for a long time. Something about him always made me want to count my fingers after we shook hands. I laughed, despite myself. The first real laugh I'd had in weeks. The following Monday, Ruth filed the formal revocation of the power of attorney. The fraud investigation moved to a new phase 1 that involved not just my accounts, but the holding company Thomas had traced. I did not call Janet. I did not respond to the second letter she sent, which arrived at Beverly's a week after the first. This one, shorter and cooler in tone, hinting at legal action if I did not make myself available for a conversation. Ruth's response to that letter was 3 sentences long, addressed to whatever attorney Janet and Greg had consulted. It said that I was represented by counsel, that all communication should be directed through that office, and that any attempt to contact me directly or to characterize my cognitive state without a court-ordered evaluation would be added to the record of the ongoing investigation. I didn't hear from them again after that. In the 6th week, at Beverly's, I started looking for my own place. Not because she asked me to, she didn't, and she wouldn't, but because I was a woman who had lived alone for 4 years and liked it, and I was ready to start again. A woman at Beverly's church mentioned a small apartment building for adults over 60, independent living, no nursing staff, no schedules, just a quiet building with an elevator and in-unit laundry and a community garden out back. She gave me the name of the building manager. The apartment I toured was on the 2nd floor, with a window that looked out over a row of old oak trees. The kitchen was small but workable. The bathroom had a walk-in shower with a bar, which my knee appreciated. There was a reading nook beside the window that was just large enough for a chair and a lamp and a small stack of books. I signed the lease on a Tuesday morning. I moved in the following Saturday. Thomas helping carry boxes while Beverly brought food and criticized his parking. The day after I moved in, I unpacked slowly and without rushing. I found places for everything I had kept. My nursing textbooks from school, the ones I had never been able to bring myself to give away. Richard's photograph, the one from our trip to Glacier the summer before he got sick. My good coffee mug, the one with the chip on the handle that I had kept for 20 years because it fit my hand exactly right. I hung nothing on the walls that first week. I wanted to feel the space before I decided what it needed. A neighbor knocked on my door that Wednesday. She was in her early 70s, with white hair cut short and gardening dirt still on her knees. She introduced herself as Frances and handed me a small pot of mint from the community garden. "It grows like it's trying to escape," she said. "So you'd be doing me a favor." I invited her in for coffee. We sat at my kitchen table for an hour. She had worked as a high school librarian for 30 years. She had 2 grown sons, one she talked to regularly and one she did not. She did not explain why, and I did not ask. We met for coffee 3 times that week. The call came on a Thursday evening, not from Janet, not from Greg, but from a number I didn't recognize at first. When I answered, a young woman's voice said, "Grandma Carol? It's Mia. Mia. My son-in-law's older daughter. 15 years old, and almost entirely unknown to me. In the way that teenagers in houses you don't belong to tend to remain unknown." "Mia?" I said carefully. "Dad's phone," she said. "I'm not calling because they asked me to. They don't know I'm calling." Okay. Another pause, longer. "I don't know what happened. Nobody tells me anything. I just know you left and then everything got really weird. And I heard my dad yelling at my mom about banks and lawyers. And then my mom cried for like 3 days. And she stopped. I just wanted to make sure you were okay. You were always nice to me. You remembered I was allergic to tree nuts. Nobody else ever remembers that." I sat down in the chair by the window. The oak trees outside were just starting to bud. "I'm okay," I said. "I promise." "Are you coming back?" "No, honey, I'm not." She was quiet for a moment. "Is it because of my dad?" I chose my words with care. "It's because I needed to be somewhere of my own." "Oh," she seemed to think about this. "That makes sense, actually. I kind of get that." I found that I was smiling. "How's school?" "It's fine. I made varsity swim team." "That's wonderful. You've been training for that since October." She laughed a little. "You remembered." "I always paid attention," I said. "I just didn't always get the chance to show it." We talked for 20 minutes. When she said she had to go, I told her she could call me again if she wanted. She said maybe she would. I told her I hoped she would. After I hung up, I sat by the window for a long time, watching the light shift in the oak trees. The apartment was quiet, in the particular way that apartments are quiet when they belong to you. No waiting, no watching, no measuring out how much space you were allowed to occupy. Ruth called that Friday with an update. The state investigation had expanded. A forensic accountant had been brought in to review the holding company. My money, all $14,000 and change, had been frozen pending the outcome. Ruth said it was likely I would recover it. She said the insurance policy fraud attempt, documented through my own notes and the phone records the investigators had subpoenaed, was being treated as a separate and more serious matter. She did not tell me what would happen to Greg. I did not ask. That part was not mine to manage anymore. Thomas called every Sunday. Beverly brought dinner on Wednesdays. Francis knocked on my door when the mint needed tending and stayed for whatever conversation happened next. The building had a small library on the first floor, donated books and mismatched chairs and a window seat that got good afternoon light. I started spending an hour there most days. The building manager asked if I'd be willing to sort and shelve new donations once a month. I said yes. I did not think about Janet and Greg often. When I did, it was not with the heat I expected. It was more like a closed door in a house I no longer lived in. Present, visible, but not inviting. What I thought about, in the mornings especially, was the version of myself who had walked into their house in February and folded into the space they gave me, grateful and quiet and careful not to take up too much room. I understood her. She had been tired and afraid and recovering from surgery, and she had wanted to believe that love was enough of a structure to hold things together. She had not been foolish. She had been hopeful. And they had used that. But she had also listened, even when she hadn't meant to. She had kept her important papers in her coat pocket. She had typed her notes in the dark on a phone, with the brightness turned all the way down. She had paid attention, in the end, to the only things that mattered. The morning I left their house with my tote bag and my coat, I did not think I was starting over. That phrase has always struck me as slightly wrong, as if everything before the hard moment is erased. You don't start over. You continue. You carry what was real, and you put down what wasn't, and you keep walking. I kept walking. Some nights I sit in the reading nook by the window and listen to the sounds of the building settling and the traffic outside, and the particular silence of a space that belongs only to me, and I think about what Richard's policy was really for. Not the money, not the number, the idea behind it. That he looked forward in time and thought, I want her to be okay without me. I want her to have options. I want her to be free to choose. That is what I have now, not what anyone gave me. What I took back. If you've been sitting with something that feels familiar, a drawer that doesn't lock, a signature you don't remember signing, a voice through a vent that you tried to unhear, I want you to know one thing. You don't need to have a plan. You just need to start. Pick up the phone. Walk to the end of the block. Write down what you heard while the words are still sharp. The rest will follow. It always does. You are not too tired. You are not too late. And you are not alone. If this story stayed with you, share it with someone who might need to hear it today. And if you've ever had to choose yourself when no one else did, leave a comment below. I'd like to know I'm not the only one.